Hi, everybody. Welcome to Northpointe Plus. This is episode 180. I'm Sylvia, and I have Jake Chandler with me today. Yes. You got to speak today. How is it speaking on stage? You get freaked?
Not too bad. No, I'm okay with it. I think the second service is always better than the first because you had an opportunity to do it once and kind of get a feel for it. So then when you go back up again, it's not so bad.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it's funny because like they try to get me to do mid-service, like the announcements, and I've done it, and then like you think that you'd just be fine. But no, like I mess up my words or something, and maybe I've seen too many like online videos of people
like
accidentally
fails and
saying
stuff,
things, like in front of everybody at church, and I'm like, that would be me.
Yeah,
I would do that.
I do lose track of the time. Like I was up there, and both services, I got off the stage and was like, could have been 5 minutes. Really? I don't know how long that was.
You black out for a minute.
Yeah, I kind of do. I don't know.
You're just letting the Holy Spirit do its work.
Yeah, I'll get off when I'm done, I guess.
Oh, man. I mean, hey, that's probably a good problem to have because you're not worried about it. You're not like, thinking about it. I remember like in college when you have to do a presentation for this amount of time. And I'm like,
oh, gosh, yeah.
Let me stop you right there. I do not want to do that. But first, before we kind of jump into the message and questions, why don't you talk about his house and like what you guys are doing? So you on stage we're talking about how it's a campus ministry, but what does that look like?
Yeah, so his house is present on 13 different university campuses in Michigan. Our goal is to reach specifically the state of Michigan. So most public universities you'll find us on, and we kind of have these three like underlying factors at work. We are intentional about fishing, walking, and chasing is what we call them. So that's kind of what defines a day in the life of campus ministry. Every day looks different, but at the end of the week, we're involved in fishing, meaning going out, chasing down students, trying to connect with new people. Jesus says, "I'll make you fishers of men." So that's what we try to do. Go find new students to talk with about Jesus. We walk with students. There's students in our ministry that are struggling with different things in their lives, and we sit down, talk with them, walk with them. And then there's some students that need to be chased down. There's some students that don't yet know Jesus but are open and receptive to his word, and we pursue them in love to the best of our ability. So in my campus ministry day or week, there's a lot of prep, a lot of logistical stuff, getting ready for our weekly Bible studies or our weekly game nights we do every Friday night. But then beyond that stuff, what I enjoy doing more than anything is just being with the students, meeting up with them either one-on-one, or there's a couple groups of us that meet throughout the week and we go through different things.
So you said you have like a weekly thing that you do?
Yeah.
Friday nights, is that what you said?
Yeah, we do weekly Bible study every Tuesday night. That's specific to Michigan Tech. Different His House campuses are going to look different. And then on Friday night we have game night. So we've got our kind of our worship meeting, and then a game night, which is just designed so students can connect with each other and invite friends and just have a good time together.
Okay, that's cool. It's also cool that, like, I don't know, right? You grew up here, and now, like, we get to support you, and, like, even Rick's talking about going to see you. Like,
I know, he did. He drove up, like,
How
2
was
weeks
that?
ago. It was
did
crazy.
Did it make you nervous, or were you excited to see
Well, I'm going to shout out Andrew. I would say his last name, but I don't know how to. He's a student that goes to Tech.
Okay.
He's part of the Bath high school crowd.
Oh,
shout out you guys if you watch the podcast. But he was like, my pastor's coming to Bible study tonight. I thought it was fun. It was fun to have them there and get to show them where we do ministry and what it looks like. They joined us, and it was fun.
Well, no, I mean, I think what you do is really cool because I was one of those kids so like the guy who was we did InterVarsity, and like the guy who was in charge of that, he was a student teacher at our high school first. And, like, that's how we knew him. And then he's like, now I'm doing InterVarsity, and I know you guys are Christians.
Yeah.
And I know you're going to like LCC, MSU. But like, I was not into it. I'm like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to, I'm good. I still go to church. I don't need, that group. So I was part of the chase down category.
Good.
And he will still,
nice.
to this day, he's like, I texted you and you ghosted me for like a year. I'm like, well, I didn't, whatever. We're good now. He married me and my husband. Like we're friends now.
I mean, that was when I went to Western. I knew about his house like when I went there as a student. But for like the first couple months, I just like ignored it or forgot about it. I was like, I got better things to do. I'm trying to figure out college life. And then eventually I was like, oh, yeah, people told me about that. I should go check it out. And here we are.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And you said Michaela gets to do stuff with you?
Yeah, yep. She is a big part of what we do. She cooks meals every Tuesday after Bible study. We have a home cooked meal for the students.
Yeah.
She meets up individually with some of the girls, and she planned a women's retreat for them last semester. So she's very involved in the work, and she really loves it.
Nice.
It's been good.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's jump in. Why don't you do just a quick recap of your message, and then we have one question we can get after too.
So in Romans 3, 9 through 20, Paul kind of summarizes some arguments, and he quotes a bunch of Psalms to paint a pretty grim picture about the evil of humanity. Yeah. It starts pretty dark, but he brings all that to our attention so that he can say all are equal before God because all are sinners before God. The law, the scriptures, have revealed that we are all unrighteous. So then the question becomes, how do we find righteousness? And Paul says, not by works of the law. He says, by works of the law, no one will be made righteous by God. But the law shows us, it makes us conscious of our sin. The law exposes that we are incapable of obeying God's command to the fullest extent. So then we need a Savior, and that is Jesus, who in Romans 3:23 it says, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, but all are freely justified by grace and redemption through Jesus.
Okay, yeah. I don't, it's just so perfect, and it's probably just the way that you were talking about it with like college kids always like wanting to either earn it or just like, because that's how, when you're in that time and that's all that your life is, that is the way your brain is wired. It's like, I'm working for this, and and especially they all probably have jobs too, where it's like you work, you get the money, like it's just that cycle.
Right, like up until college is the first opportunity you have to try to, like, your whole life you've been being graded. And you got to figure out where like worth and acceptance and approval fits in. Some college students don't care. Like I said, some are like, if I pass my class with a D-, I'm happy. I'm good to go. Others, and we've seen it at Michigan Tech already, like if I'm not getting A+ and not getting 100% in every class, I'm not doing enough. And like it's a hard mentality to fight against.
Well, and like something that I've always found interesting about college is that it's like its own little world, because you live there, you work there, you go to school there, you eat there, you find friends there. That's who you're hanging out with. And a couple weeks ago when we were having a money talk at church, you know, Rick was talking about giving and everything. And it was like, we kind of just said people don't like to talk about how much they make or whatever, because that's what we like say our value is in, or like, because you're going to think I'm less valuable, whatever. I think that the same, you know, is true with college kids, like, you know, maybe not wanted to talk about grades, but like like the grades have so much value, right? Because some kids are like, yeah, I don't care. And then you said like, you know, my sister was like straight A's, and if it dipped, she's freaking. And I was not like that. I was kind of like I'm just getting through. Like, I'm just whatever. And so it is such a hard, almost like a brand new concept, even if they're Christians. It's like, oh, you're right. Like, I don't have to.
And it's a hard thing to fight against, because to some degree we're fighting the university, because the university, especially Michigan Tech, but many universities will say, you are, like, if you graduate from our university, you're the best. You are the greatest. There's a big banner across campus that says, tomorrow needs Michigan Tech. And you walk through their like student center building, and it says, out of these doors come the best engineers in the world. And you're like, man, that's some pressure. It is. Like these students don't need.
Hanging over your head.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the university, Tech and others, like, want students to be the best they can be. That's like not bad, but they do it in this way that's like, you're at Michigan Tech, you've got this standard, this legacy, you got to be great. And students feel that. We see that already. Students are like, man, I know I'm at this great school and I need to be better. And I'm like, you're fine, don't worry about it.
Yeah, well, and like that's another thing like that's so nice about you guys being there is like you're kind of that outside world, because again, like they're surrounded by that all the time. And so it's easy to forget, like, let's talk about what you're going to do when you leave. Yeah, you're going to get a job, but do you think like your job's going to be your entire life, or
Right.
you're going to have other things?
Mhm.
Like it's so hard when you're just in that little bubble to
Yeah.
think there's so much more than this. Like
Yeah.
so much more.
Oh, yeah.
But so our first, and I think this is our only question for today, but somebody wrote in and said, I'm constantly struggling with different sin in my life. How do I know I'm not drifting further from God and being saved? Am I really secure in God?
Mm-hmm. It's a big question.
Yeah.
And like, I think behind those questions, there are a few other questions. Like, what is the point of God's commandments if I'm not like made right by them? Why do them? Mm-hmm. And I think of in Galatians, Paul will say the purpose of the law was, again, he said in Romans the same thing, to show us our sin. And the law was kind of this placeholder until Jesus came along. So we think about God's commandments as like, this is what I have to do in order to be saved or in order to be accepted or approved of by him. But that's not the case. That's not at all what makes you saved or secure by God. What does the last part of that question say?
It said, like, am I really secure in God?
Yeah.
How do I know if I'm, getting further from God and being saved, or am I really secure?
Yeah, secure in God is the point there. You're made secure in God, not by me. I don't make myself secure in God. He makes me secure in him. I think of Ephesians that says he chose us to be holy and blameless in his sight. He adopted us, and it was his good pleasure to do so, is what Ephesians says. And then as a common verse, we may have heard it before, by grace you've been saved through faith, not of yourselves, but it's a gift of God, that no one may boast. And then later, at the end of chapter 2, Ephesians says, you're God's masterpiece, or God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works. The good works that we do, that God has asked of us, are an outflowing of our security in God, not an effort to get there, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. It's because God has chosen me as holy and blameless that I get to be kind to others, or encourage whatever good work God has set for me.
Yeah, and I think I think it'd be fair to say too that it's like maybe it's not an overthinking thing, or the enemy sneaking these thoughts in.
Yeah.
And we just talked about it. Tim Chanter,
mm-hmm.
Chanters. They came and he did such a good job of explaining. He said it's just a one-liner. It's like one little thought that just sends you in a spiral. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about that a lot. And I think that kind of relates to this sometimes when you're just like, man, God's not with me. Like everything's going wrong. And it's like you just have that one thought that pops into your head that can just send you.
Yeah.
And then even Jamie on stage is like, I have been there. And I think all of us can say that we've been there too.
Yeah, but I think that's what gives the message of Jesus so much more confidence. Like I brought up during the message that's what's different about Christianity and about Jesus than these other religions of the world. If a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist was asking me that question, I'd say, good luck. You don't know. You're hoping you do enough good and that it all works out in the end, but you don't really know that for sure. But the message of Jesus is different because it starts with assurance that I haven't done enough and I have to be okay with that. That's the hardest part, being okay with the fact that I'm incapable. But it starts with Jesus making us righteous, and that's where our faith begins. It's not the end goal, if that makes sense.
Yeah. You said in your guys' group you have some kids that are like, I don't even know if I believe in God. How often do you deal with kids that come from different religious backgrounds? And like learning about that. Yeah,
it's a common thing in ministry, especially campus ministry, because something that I find so amazing about campus ministry is that the nations have come to you. Like we've got several amazing missionaries overseas serving there, which is incredible. And when I go to Michigan Tech, I'm still in the States, but I get to talk with students from South Africa or from Zimbabwe or from India and China, and they're all different, especially the Indians and the Chinese, and they've got, it's ingrained in them, these different religions. I was talking with this Indian student a few weeks ago, And harder for them to accept is not their sin. That's the easy part.
Yeah.
The hardest thing for them to accept is that they don't have to earn it. I was talking to this one guy and going through the gospel with him, and I say, hey, look, we're all sinners before God, guilty before him. And he's like, yep, okay. And I say, but the truth of Jesus is that he's paid the penalty for you, that he offers you his forgiveness. And he goes, no, I will never allow that. And I'm like, that's the truth, though.
That's a tough thing to argue with if you've already made up your mind.
The harder part for us is recognizing what we've been given. We all are quick to admit we're sinners. Nobody has a problem saying I've made mistakes and messed up and do bad things. What's a lot harder for us to accept and come to terms with is that Jesus is willing to forgive.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I even think of, like, people give me a compliment. I'm like, no, really.
Yeah,
like, you know,
exactly.
If that's just somebody telling me a minor compliment, how hard is it going to be for somebody to be like, oh, yeah, somebody died for me.
Yeah.
And took care of all the problems that I had. Like, that's crazy.
We're going through John in our student Bible study, and we just read John 13, I think it was, where we read about Jesus washing his disciples' feet, and then you get this weird phrase, John, the author of John, go figure, he refers to himself as the disciple Jesus loved. Oh. And the students were like, oh, man, how could he ever say that about himself? I could never say that about myself. And I had to stop him and say, well, why not? Are you not the disciple Jesus loves? Like, does he not love you?
Yeah.
And, like, it's hard to accept that he loves us.
Yeah. Well, and like, think, like, you're not supposed to boast and you're not supposed to do all these things.
I mean, you hear all these things.
But then when you're like, no, I am a child of God.
Yeah.
Like, it's just one of those things that kind of goes against culture and I don't know, everything else.
Right. Yeah.
But on campus, like, I mean, I've been to college campuses before. I know how hard it is. Do you have any kids who like to, like, argue with you?
Yeah.
I
wonder.
How do you handle that?
Michigan Tech's a fun campus. It's a campus of engineers, and engineers love to debate the details.
Oh, yeah. Yup.
But it's also a really friendly campus, and people are happy to talk. Most people are very polite in their debates. If they have something to argue with, they're going to do it in a good way. I've found that if I'm approaching things in love, they'll do so similarly. If I go out on campus and I'm like pounding them with the God, like, you're a sinner, you're all these things, they're not going to be interested.
A lot of people.
They're going to come at me with some heated arguments. But if I'm out there just someone that wants to tell them about this Jesus character, they'll listen and they'll say, well, this is what I think, and this is why I don't necessarily agree. And we'll have good conversations, and some will say, oh, you make a really good point. Others are like, I just don't think that's the truth. And that's the battle.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because, like, a big part of that in being on a college campus, like, you probably get that a lot, and to have to be in that, like, it's not always a fight, but like you're defending. Yeah, like, that can be not stressful, but you want to make sure you're doing a good job.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I take comfort. This is another one of my campus ministers would often remind me of 1 Corinthians, I think it's 3:7. I could be wrong, but that's what I think. That says, we water and we plant, but only God brings the growth. Mm-hmm. And when my campus minister would tell us about going on campus to talk to students about the gospel, he'd get very ironic and he'd say, oh, I didn't realize you had the power to save somebody. I didn't realize you carried that power to condemn them to hell or otherwise. And you're like, oh, that's not what I'm saying. Then he's like, why are you acting like it then?
Yeah. No,
like, it's good. We go out there with our best efforts and let the Spirit fill in the gaps, and he's the one that does any growth anyways. Yeah. I can go out there and give my best, and my best will still be falling short regardless of my training or my experience. But if a heart's going to be changed, it's not because I convinced them. It's because of God. Right.
Well, I'm glad that there's people like you that, like, have that drive and are able to do it, because college campuses can be a scary place. That can be hard. I like it. My sisters are in college, and I feel bad for them sometimes, because I just remember where I was, where I'm like, I'm just flying under the radar. Like, I'm just trying to get out of here. Like, I don't want to start anything, whatever. And I think that they're doing a good job too. But I'm just thankful for all kinds of campus ministries for those kinds of things. And I think that I think Rick was really, bragging about you at the start, because he was saying that you guys had to move up to the coldest of cold,
Yep.
Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
How did that go? When did they tell you to go up there? Did they were like, well, what do you think? Like, how did that happen?
So we ended up in a spot as a ministry where we didn't have anybody on staff at Michigan Tech.
Okay.
Like mid last school year. So our director's name is Scott, our executive director, and I remember getting a call from Scott on a Monday night at like 7 p.m. And I'm like, why is Scott calling me at Monday night? And I answer, and he was very quick to the punch. He was like, hey, wondering if I could stop by tomorrow and we can talk about whether or not you guys want to move to Michigan Tech. And I'm like, I'm sorry? Excuse me? And I said, I don't think tomorrow's going to work. How about Thursday? And he said, okay, I'm coming Thursday. And then he came and we talked about everything. He actually was a minister there for 20 years at Michigan Tech before he moved downstate to East Lansing to be our director. So he's very familiar with Michigan Tech and Houghton and the area. So he's telling us all these things, and the timing was not great because we went from there to Western's main worship meeting with the students. Mm-hmm. And that night at midnight, I hopped in a van and drove away for spring break.
Oh my goodness.
So Michaela stayed home, and I'm down in Carolina. And we're like, wow, this was not super convenient. But I think it was helpful because we got to think and process through things, and we'd check back in the evenings. And we quickly found that we were both very strangely excited about the idea. And, you've arrived at a certain place when you're like, but we should probably like slow down. Like, we should visit first before we make any decisions. But in our hearts, we're like, we're going.
Yeah, it's happening. Done deal.
So it was certainly not a tell. It was an ask. Mm-hmm. But we were both feeling excited about it. And that's certainly God's work in us, preparing us for that. Because when I came on staff in 2022, they said, hey, we'd love to have you at Western Michigan or at Northern in Marquette. And I said, Western it is. UP's too far away.
Yeah.
And our hearts were not there. We were like, that's just not possible. Sorry.
That's how far I've been, Marquette. That's where my husband went to school for a year. And it's like, that's it. I've never been up further.
I had only been to Marquette until last year.
Yeah. So is that is it small college still, so it's not big city or anything like that? You're kind of out in the boonies where it's the college and then there's nothing else?
Kind of both. It's like this weird thing. The college is about 8,000 or 9,000 students, which isn't tiny. And the town certainly is as big as it is because of the college.
Yeah.
But you leave Houghton and you've got an hour and a half before anything else shows up.
Yeah.
So time, drive time has really skewed. I think 2-hour drive, no problem, easy.
Yeah.
That's the distance from Houghton to Marquette.
Yep.
And before that, I was like, oh man, I have to drive an hour to my parents' house from Kalamazoo. Oh gosh, it's rough.
Yeah, look at you
now.
now.
I can do that any day.
So and you guys only had one student at first? That's
one or two, yeah.
Okay, and then how did you grow that? What was your game plan?
That was a really, really good question. Certainly by God's mercy. Mm-hmm. So a little backstory, not backstory, but background information. You have what's called an RSO, a registered student organization. Mm-hmm. It's a student group that the campus recognizes as official. Mm-hmm. Because of the lack of staff and the lack of students, our RSO had fizzled out. We were not a recognized group with the university. So we couldn't reserve space or reserve places to do things or time to do things or really put our name out there.
You need somebody to sign off on that, right?
It's pretty, you do. You just got to fill out these forms, but you don't get the forms unless you have registered student org status. So Michaela and I are like, what are we going to do? What we ended up doing is we took a wagon that we found in the basement of the campus house, and we just filled it with Oreos and single-serve snacks and stuff, and we typed business cards to each one, and then we just wandered around campus during freshman orientation. You're like, nice. You want a free snack? And then just kind of flying under the radar like that, we just set up yard games in one of the main yards and invited students to play and got connected with them that way. So nothing crazy. We didn't have any big operations or anything. We're just going out there and being on campus and just meeting students and saying hi to them. what I found out later, and I'm still finding out, is that like certainly God's been at work, because these students will drop these things randomly. Like I remember leaving Bible study with this guy one night, freshman guy, and he says, "Man, I'm so glad my youth pastor from Virginia told me about his house." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
Why? Who? When?" And it's just a few students like that. They're like, "Yeah, I'm glad I met Scott last year at summer camp." And I'm like, "You did?"
Yeah.
So like, there's a handful of students that God brought to his house without me even knowing about it, which has been cool.
Nice. Oh man, that is cool. And like, I'm sure it's just, I think it's a special thing when we have guest speakers come and like get to hear you guys talk and just more about what you're doing and how it's going and everything. So I'm sure everybody's gonna be praying for you guys and hopefully it keeps going well. But thanks for coming today and talking and
thanks for
giving us
having
more
me.
information. And
Absolutely.
thanks everybody for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And we'll get to see you on Sunday.
All righty.